Hi, I'm Julia, and welcome back to NB Library. This is the wrap-up of all the books that I read in May. That's actually not quite true. It's going to be all the books that I haven't reviewed yet that I read in May because I had two different reading vlogs this month. So that would be my anticipated releases vlog and my Mermaid vlog. And then there are also some books in here for upcoming vlogs that you'll see me talk more about at length. So this will be everything that I haven't reviewed yet. But first, let's run the numbers. I read 23 books this month. 47.83 of those were purchased, pretty proud of that. 43.48% were on audio. 34.78% were by white authors. 30.43% were by Black authors. And 34.78% were by Indigenous and other POC authors. There is one anthology that I read that throws that number off, so if you're wondering why that number doesn't quite add up to 100%, that's why. And my average rating was, drumroll please, 3.92, my best of the year, and that's because half of my 5-star reads of the year I read this month. The first book that I finished in May that I haven't yet talked about, although I think this was actually the first one that I finished in May because I started it in April, was When Trees Testify by Beronda L. Montgomery. I rated this 4.25 stars, and this is the exact kind of nature writing that I like. It's mostly nature writing, but with just a little sprinkling of memoir in there, and also history and race. These are all things that I love to see in nature writing, because nature writing isn't just science writing. A lot of other disciplines and genres get brought into it. Basically, this is about African American relationship with trees, and so the author talks about a different tree per chapter and kind of brings in her own experiences with these trees or trees that she's gone to see. Travel writing is also can be a part of nature writing, and I really liked it. I think it's going to go on my favorite books of the year list, honestly. I can't explain to you why books that are rated lower than others get on my favorite books of the year list, but other books don't. I don't really know how to explain it. But yes, if you are looking for nature writing, particularly nature writing from a BIPOC lens, I really recommend this one. I then read An Arc of Doe by Rebecca Barrow, which I received from Penguin Young Readers via NetGalley. This one comes out June 23rd, and I gave this one a 2.5. I picked this up because it's sapphic and in verse. I like books in verse, I like sapphic books, but it is horror. I've been dipping my toe into horror lately, but this one wasn't for me. I think that part of the reason it wasn't for me is the genre, but part of it was the writing. Between it being in verse and also just kind of the distance from the characters, I felt just kind of out of remove from everything that was happening, and I also didn't like the characters very much, so everything that happened I was like, yep, that seems about right. Basically, we're following a few different points of view and timelines, where one is a sort of the ghost of a deer, or like a deer spirit that is watching over this young woman who is a cheerleader in a small town, and then a collective first person from the perspective of all the girls on the cheerleading squad, much like my creative writing degree classes. Everyone wrote first person collective from the point of view of cheerleaders. I don't know why. But when a new girl moves to their town and joins the cheerleading squad and seems like the coach's favorite, the main character will do anything to regain her top spot. And I really do mean anything. So the end of this book felt like very inevitable and unsurprising, and yeah, as I said, I just kind of went, yep, all right. Next was Testimony of Mute Things by Lois McMaster-Bujold. This is the 15th, I think, Penrick and Desdemona novella. I read this one just in time for the next one to come out. Truly, Bujold will just keep writing these, and I will keep reading them. Haven't read the new one yet. But this is set much earlier in the Penrick and Desdemona timeline. This is before Pen meets Nycus and gets married and has kids, so he is in his early 20s, and there's a murder mystery, and there's also more of an involvement with Desdemona's past, particularly her most immediate past of a man that her most previous host was romantically involved with, and so she is speaking through Penric to this guy that, not Penric, but she used to date, and so that was fun, but didn't do anything revolutionary, not a favorite of mine in the series, and I rated it 3.5 stars. Skipping over some books that I read for other vlogs to get to Field Guide for the Formerly Villainous by Autumn K. England. This was also an ARC, and actually by the time this video goes up, it will have released. It releases on June 2nd. So I received this via NetGalley from Poisoned Pen Press, so thank you for sending me this ARC. This is another in the entry of former cult members cozy fantasy, this little subgenre. I complained at length last month about Recipes for an Unexpected Afterlife, which has a similar setup. Basically, in this world, there was an enchantrix who had a bunch of people join their cult and then took over their minds and tried to take over the world and was stopped, and all the cult followers have got their minds back and actually received some financial compensation to get them set back up, because for so long they were just puppets, so they don't have any place to go or any money or clothes. So our main character is Oakland. They joined the cult when they were like 17. They're now like 23. They haven't really known anything as an adult aside from being puppeted by an evil cult leader. And they go to a very Stardew Valley-esque town where they buy a farm and try and just become a part of the community without ever revealing their past. I was worried at first that this was going to be like very Stardew Valley, because it's split into parts and each part is a season and it starts with spring like Stardew Valley does. But aside from that, and aside from the small town setting, it's not that much like Stardew Valley. Like, you can't point to a character and go, that's Robin. It is much more like D&D inspired. There's a paladin who is Oakland's love interest who prays to her god to get her spells every morning, like a D&D paladin. Oakland is basically a sorcerer. They have had magic from birth, and it's just innate in them. A lot of this story is just about healing and contributing to a community and learning how to do that. And I don't want to say pleasantly surprised by this book, but I went in expecting all these things, that it was going to be very Stardew Valley-like, and the main character was gonna, feel bad about their past and have everyone around them tell them it's not your fault. And while the latter did happen, I'm gonna give it a pass, because I think the repercussions of what Oakland did while under command, basically, are explored well, and I think that most of the arc of the story is about them forgiving themselves in a way that I think was really well handled and can kind of be read as a metaphor for what we do in the depths of like a mental health episode, or in what we do when we are really depressed, and how our friends can support us through that, and how we can move through that and forgive ourselves from that and heal and grow. So yeah, I liked it quite a bit. I'm gonna rate it 3.75 stars, and thanks again to the publisher for the ARC. I then read Cleopatra by Sarah El Arifi, which I gave 3.25 stars, and I have quite a few like complicated thoughts on it. I watched a review from Plant-Based Bride who read this book, and I thought it sounded really good. It's bisexual Cleopatra in a world where gods have given certain people magic, but otherwise is kind of, cleaving to the historical story of Cleopatra. But I felt like, aside from the fantastical elements, this book wasn't really doing anything like new or revolutionary. I don't know Cleopatra's story all that well, but it all just seemed kind of rote, and it seemed like a lot of interesting things were montaged over. I liked the historical setting. I find this era of history really, really interesting. As you might know about Cleopatra, at least the historical Cleopatra as we understand her, she was a lover of both Julius Caesar and his like protege Mark Antony. Something that I didn't realize is that Cleopatra was in Rome when Julius Caesar was assassinated, which it's funny how like it's a really packed era of Roman history. There's a reason that this woman's life has stayed for so long. It was super interesting and eventful, even though she died in her late 30s. It's one of those, like, this woman will do anything to protect her throne books, and I'm getting kind of tired of those, where it's like, she's not a good person by the end of it, and there were also, I feel like, a lot of disconnects between what Cleopatra thought about herself and what actually happens on the page, where she thinks like, oh, I don't like violence, I don't like death, but she kills people and orders people to be tortured and killed throughout the book. And so I didn't really like feel bad for her being like, oh, forced into this position or whatever. I feel like there were a lot of times where she had the chance to not take a certain path that she did. I also feel like her bisexuality was not as explored as it could have been, and in fact, her like female companion Charmian is really only there for one scene at the end, and otherwise she's sort of like a head that follows Cleopatra around. Like, she's just kind of set dressing in the story, which made it feel like Cleopatra's bisexuality was set dressing in the story. Like, if you're gonna have Cleopatra be bisexual, I feel like, you know, do something with it. Not that people can't just be bi, but it was deliberately done here. We don't know that historically Cleopatra was bisexual, and yet why was that change made? I feel like a lot more of it could have been explored, but then you're also tied into the, you know, historical timeline of her being with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. I then read The Pale Queen by Ethan M. Aldrich. This was part of my ecstatic realization that now that I have a Kobo Clara color, I can read graphic novels on there. I could have done that before, but I wanted to read them in color. And I read this for the first contact square for r/fantasy book bingo, because I had started to read the book that I was going to read for that square, decided not to read it, was looking for ideas for what to read, and someone had, I think, added this to the challenge on the story graph, and it's like technically a fantasy first contact because there's fae, and I said, what the heck, it's queer, it's a graphic novel, I'll go for it, because I'm doing an all queer bingo board. And it was good. Like, graphic novels are never as long as I want them to be. Like, I know they can't all be on a sunbeam, but I want them to like do more and say more, but they can't, because, you know, a graphic novel is a medium that has a certain, you know, pacing and length, and this was like middle grade to YA, but it has a like very timeless fairy tale quality that I liked, and depicts not necessarily like an abusive romantic relationship, but still like kind of an abusive relationship with another person that I thought was really interesting. It kind of reminded me of Game of Fox and Squirrels, which is another middle grade book that explores abuse through a like fantastical fairy tale lens. and I rated it 3.5 stars. I then read another arc. I got a lot of arcs this month. The Marriage Rebound by Mecca James, which I got through Nick Alley from Harlequin. This is the sequel to Love and Sports Ball by Mecca James. It is Black Sapphic sports romance. This is a type of romance that I don't think ever read from before, which is the main characters are already married, but they need to like strengthen and repair their relationship and pull it back from the brink. You've got basketball player Courtney and then her wife, Sasha. Courtney feels like she has all this pressure on her to provide for Sasha, and Sasha doesn't want necessarily like the glamorous basketball player wife lifestyle, even though she postures like she does. Really, she just wants to spend time with her wife. And one of the reasons that this romance works as a romance is that they got married impulsively, and then ever since they were married a few years previously, Courtney's just been kind of go between her basketball season and then playing in Europe. This was just fun. It was very readable. I was like tired and needed something easily readable to get through. I wish that the main characters were more mature. Sasha especially acts very immature, and she tells a lie that were I married to her would have been grounds for divorce, personally. But the nice thing was that even when things were rocky with them, they're already married, they already love and care about each other, and so they have the foundation of marriage to fall back on. So it's not like they just started dating 2 months ago, and if one of them does something bad, it's like, oh, let's break up. It's like, well, you've provided for me, we live together, we have all of these years of history. I wish that the reconciliation and communication had come a bit earlier in the story, but it was just good fun. I rated it 3.5 stars. I then read in like one sitting Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu. This is one of my 26 books to read in 2026. I really ought to watch the TV show. One, TV show came out 2 years ago already. I thought it came out like a few months ago. And two, it's directed by Taika Waititi. I had no idea. Anyway, if you haven't already heard of this book, this is a very meta book and is told in script format, which is why I was able to read it so quickly. And it was a little bit hard to grasp at first, but basically the main character, Willis, his life is taking place inside a TV show, and he knows that and they all know that. So everyone is simultaneously like, you know, Chinese immigrants or Chinese Americans living in San Francisco and are real, but then also they are extras on a TV show, and they're not working as actors. They're like their lives are bit parts. And that was the part that was kind of hard to grasp, where he is not an actor, he is a player in this drama. There were some really heartbreaking things in here about parents aging and his own parents' lives and that influencing him. And then also conversation about Asian American proximity to whiteness, but also proximity to blackness. Of course, how Asian people are depicted on screen in Hollywood, and I thought it was very well done. I wish that I could understand it a little bit more, but I'm not gonna fault the author for that, and I rated it 4 stars. I then read This Kingdom Will Not Kill Me by Alana Andrews, a book I could make like probably an entire like hour-and-a-half long video on talking about. I'll try and distill my thoughts quickly, and I'll have to leave some things out. This is an isekai story, portal fantasy. The main character has woken up in her favorite unfinished book series, where her only powers are she knows everything that's going to happen to a certain point. She's read all the books and has them memorized, and she can't be killed. She can get really, really hurt, but if she is killed, she will come back to life. So she really digs down and is like, fuck the author, fuck the villain, I'm here to turn this bitch around and I'm not letting this city fall, because the second book ended on a cliffhanger of the villain having taken over the city, killed a bunch of people, killed a lot of Maggie's favorite characters, and she's like, nuh-uh, not on my watch. But she has to be careful, because if she changes things too much, then the future will change and it won't line up with the future that she knows, that she can predict. She surrounds herself with a lot of characters, one of whom is a spoiler to talk about. He is the love interest, but I can't even tell you his name because it got spoiled for me. I don't want to spoil it for you. The plot of this is incredible. It was so cool to read. I was like, if I'm taking the garbage out, if I'm doing the dishes, if I'm driving, if I'm falling asleep, I'm listening to this audiobook. I also had to do that because it was very long, so if I wanted to get through it, I had to be listening to it at all hours. But I wanted to be, because the plot was so propulsive and so exciting. But I wanted to care about the characters a little bit more. Like, I think Maggie is a great character, and the way that she functions in the story is really well done, where she's not a typical woman in a romantasy story. She is driving the story forward. She may not be able to fight, but she is a like political mastermind. And she's able to manipulate people because she's read things from their point of view. She knows their secrets, she knows how they think, all of that. The love interest is a typical like romantasy love interest, but every time he acts like possessive, or he's like, marry me, I'll take care of you, she's like, no, absolutely not. Even though I'm attracted to you, you have so much power over me and so much investment in keeping me alive and under your control. There's no way in hell I'm giving you access to all of me. Not gonna happen. So I wasn't rooting for them, and I wanted Maggie to not be as into him as she was. Now, I did rate this 4.25 stars, and like I said, I really liked it, but I also have like, I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of notes. So like the entire time I was reading this, I really admire the world building. It's a really well set up world. There are so many little details, but at the same time, this is more of a me thing. It's not the book's fault. It is described as Outlander meets Game of Thrones, which I think is an apt description, but like Game of Thrones is gritty and dark, and so is this book, and so is like the world this book is set in, and that's like not for me. A lot of the characters that Maggie meets are really like complicated, fucked up people, and I just wanted like a few more characters to root for. Also, despite the fact that it is a well built out world, it is kind of just a generic fantasy world. I wanted there to be like a little bit more magic and people's day-to-day lives to be like a little bit different. While I was reading this, I was really wishing that I had read The Burning Stone by Kate Elliott, because I had just come off reading Prince of Dogs last month, and just like all I could think about was how much I wanted to read The Burning Stone, and all I could think about was how much I wish that I was Maggie, but I was inside the world of The Burning Stone and I could get my hands around Frieder Hugh's throat. Like, Maggie wants to kill the villain really bad, and I want to kill the villain of the Crown of Stars series really bad. But I did just kind of wish that I was in a world that I cared about more. Like, the plot was exciting, but I didn't really care what happened to the world. Also, this is a minor thing, but I can't stop thinking about it. This book is not propaganda, but bear with me. It has some of the DNA of propaganda, where Maggie was a criminal justice major in college before she switched majors because it was too intense for her. But she says that she wanted to be a detective because she wanted justice and to help people, which is not really what American police bring. And she is not a cop in the story, nor does she have like the role of a cop in this world, but there's a particular plot line where she's functioning like the junior FBI agent in a propaganda show. I don't know how else to explain it. We're like, she's like, I'm gonna get justice for these people, and I'm gonna do whatever I need to do, you know, like a cop in a propaganda show. But I did really like this. I will read the sequel. Oh, also, speaking of sequel, I knew this would end on a cliffhanger, and I kept checking the last few minutes of the book. I was like, surely something's gonna be revealed here. I wanted there to be more in the story about how she got there. She doesn't know. It's never explained or figured out. I have a theory that she might be there to finish the book for the author, because like, you know, the Kingkiller Chronicles or like Game of Thrones, it's an unfinished series and has been unfinished for 10 plus years. And I think somehow this is a way for the author to like, of the in-universe book series, to figure out how to finish the series. But I also kept waiting for one of the characters in the world to be revealed that they were also from Earth. The cliffhanger was a very much in-universe cliffhanger. And that's all I'll say, because I don't want to tell you what met my expectations and what didn't, because I feel like that would spoil what the ending is to some extent. I then read 2 books for specifically the Pacific Islander part of Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, which it was in May here in the US. And I rated them both really highly. So I read No Country for 8-Spot Butterflies by Julian Agon. This is labeled as a lyric essay, but it's a book of essays. It's kind of nature writing in its own extent. The author is from Guam and is talking about his upbringing in Guam and also activist work that he's done in Guam and with his law firm defending Pacific Islander land and communities. And it was really beautiful, really well written, very galvanizing in doing climate justice work. I went and donated money to a climate justice organization immediately after finishing the book. So I rated that one 4.5 stars. And then I also rated The Invisible Wild by Nikki Vanderkar 4.5 stars. And it's going on my favorite books of the year. I was crying while driving listening to this. It was so well written and so satisfying. So I didn't know this, but in Hawaii there is a traditional story about these short people, 2 to 3 feet tall, called menehune, who were there when the original Hawaiians landed on the island, and they lived in harmony briefly. There's a whole story. And so this is set in the modern day about a young woman who can see the menehune, and their land is being threatened by a development. So Emma is trying to help them. So is a boy who gets roped into this, and her mom are also preparing for her sister's wedding to her girlfriend in a few weeks. And Emma is also grappling with being part Native Hawaiian but not looking it and not acting like what a Native Hawaiian acts like, whatever that even means. But this is fairly short, and it just tells the story so perfectly in the page count that it has. And the ending, like I said, it made me cry, and it's all about community and working together on something. No Country for 8-Spot Butterflies made me feel really galvanized about the environment and what we can do to protect it. So I really recommend it. This is Nikki Vanderkar's first book, and wow, can I not wait for her to write more. But oh my gosh, then I read my 4th 5-star book of the year, The Witch Below the Dreaming Wood by H.G. Perry. Another arc. I know. you all can't read this until June, but I really recommend that you do. So I got this from Orbit, and this premise was so good. And then when I read like the first page or so, I was like, shit, this is gonna be my favorite book of the year. So we're in 2 timelines. And so the premise is that it's World War II. It's like the height of the Blitz in London, 1941, and people across the country are having dreams about King Arthur. There's a legend that King Arthur will return in the hour of Britain's greatest need. But one woman, Elaine, who works for the British Museum, is having dreams about Nimue. Now, for those of you who aren't obsessed with Arthuriana like I am, Nimue was Merlin's apprentice who trapped him in a tree or a cave. Stories differ, and kind of brought about the downfall of Camelot. Nimue was in a book with many characters that I loved in The Bright Sword by Lev Grossman. I have it here. One of my favorite books from last year. Nimue was my favorite character in this, even though there were, like I said, many great characters. And H.G. Perry captures kind of the same voice of Nimue from this book, and like has her character be really similar in a way that felt like I was getting to read a continuation of one of my favorite books. So our chapters are alternating between Elaine's chapters in 1941 and Nimue's chapters in Camelot. Elaine has been sent to this house in Wales kind of to get her to safety partially, and to go through this eccentric collector's library. There is a young man named Tom who works for the house. And then in the Camelot timeline, Nimue is getting to know Merlin. She's been raised by her mother, Morgan Le Fay, to be Merlin's downfall, but Merlin is just not what she expects. Now I keep holding it up, in The Bright Sword, Merlin and Nimue's relationship is very bad. Like, Merlin is not a good person in this book, but in Witch Below the Dreaming Wood, he was so much more complicated, and I was really grateful for that because I do love Merlin as a character. Yes, I watched BBC Merlin growing up. No, I did never finish it, but I do have fond memories. And looking back, there have been quite a few books that I've read the last few years that have been Arthurian retellings that I've rated highly. Like, this one, but also The Story of Silence by Alex Myers. Oh, and right next to The Bright Sword on the shelf, Spear by Nicola Griffith. This is my signed copy. Reading this book, not only was the writing incredible, it also felt like catching up with favorite characters that I hadn't seen in a while. Now, you might be expecting from kind of what I described so far in the premise of this book that it has like a really epic, like, battles and all of that, and that's not the case. This is like a quieter character study. It is about relationships. Every character was so well written, and every relationship was like, you think it's one thing and then it's another, because like people are complicated and relationships are complicated, and no character is ever just like one thing. There were some things that I thought were like kind of left unanswered in this book that I would have liked to see, but also there's a moment at the end where I cried tears of joy. So that's why it's a 5-star, and like, I mean, you'll have to see the rankings at the end of the year, but right now it's like my 3rd favorite book of the year. Intertidal by Yvonne Aves is a book of nature writing. I rated this 3.25 stars. I wanted to like it more than I did, and the writing is really beautiful, but this is like an edited series of diary entries, and so it was not like cohesive in the way that I wanted it to be, and I also could have done with fewer Harry Potter references. The Violin Conspiracy by Brendan Slocum, one of my favorite authors. I rated this 4 stars. Like his other books, it is compulsively readable. This is a kind of non-linear story about young man, Ray, who becomes a really famous violin player, even though he is from a black family that is not always supportive of him. But it turns out that his grandfather's fiddle that he'd been playing is a Stradivarius, and that makes him like even more like popular and well known. And at the beginning of the book, and then you kind of like go back and forth across the timeline, the Stradivarius has been stolen. So it's kind of a like mystery thriller, but it's like a musical thriller, and I highly enjoyed it, and there's a reason that he's one of my favorite authors. I still like Symphony of Secrets more, but Symphony of Secrets has a historical dual timeline, and I just love historical fiction. So the second to last book that I read was Exquisite Things by Abdi Nazemian. I really liked Abdi Nazemian's Only This Beautiful Moment last year, which is a generational novel about this Persian family. This book is also kind of historical fiction. We're following two characters who, they have a few different names, but I'll just call them Bram and Oliver. Bram is from the 1890s. He was 17 in the 1890s when he became immortal, and he meets Oliver in Boston in the 1920s, and without Oliver's consent, turns him immortal. I rated this 3.75 stars. I really liked this book, and like Nazemian's other work, the characters are very complicated. They definitely have their flaws, and the book is kind of like about their flaws and about how they fall in love with each other despite their flaws. I also think that the pacing could have been better. The book like kind of gives you information about Bram's, early life, and then we have a good like third of the book with Oliver in Boston, and then like the rest of the book is set in England in the 80s. They've been apart for a long time and then come back together to live as a family with this black trans woman who kind of adopts them. And then we're also flashing forward to 2025 with the two of them. Both like the danger of the book was introduced and dealt with like really quickly. And I think that just could have been fixed. Just move things around more, lengthen some sections, and it would have been great. The book talks a lot about Bram's decision to make Oliver immortal, but then also Oliver's like fear of being seen or making waves, even in a time in London where being gay is becoming like more and more accepted despite Thatcherism, and there are lots of protests going on. Bram thinks that it's like their time to be out and to really live, and Oliver is still scared. I don't think that the book or the characters ever like fully reckon with Bram's decision to turn Oliver immortal. Like, the book kind of asks you, like, is this forgivable, and lands on the side of yes. I feel like the answer is, for me, no, but I think that it's believably dealt with by Oliver. I wanted to read this one for a while. It wasn't disappointing by any means. I liked it, and I will read more by Nazemian. And the last book that I read this month will be talked about at length in a future vlog. That was The Corruption of Hollis Brown by Kay Ankrum, which I gave 4.25 stars. So, great reading month, really turned it around from last month, and I'm hoping that June continues this streak of good books. I don't know if I'm like getting better at DNFing things, or if like I've gotten to a point where my TBR is full of books that I want to read. I do want to read everything on my TBR, but not every book is a book that I want to pick up immediately. Some of them are like, I'll read this when I'm in the mood for it, or I think this history is interesting, but I'm not as excited by nonfiction as I am by this fantasy, that kind of thing. But as I, go through my TBR and kind of weed out some of those books that I'm not as excited about, I hope and I feel that I will just continue to rate the books that I read highly. That's gonna be it for me. Thank you very much for watching. I think I'm gonna make a video next week. I'm not quite sure. I might take the week off, we'll see. If you haven't already, please like this video and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.